folks, I'm L.A. Little, and this is your weekly TA wrap, where we take a look at these markets from a neoclassical perspective and ask ourselves, what happened last week, and what does it tell us about the coming one? I do the show once a week on the weekly, every Sunday night, live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, here from the base of what was a beautiful Rocky Mountain day. I do a show 4 times a week on the Daily Wrap. That's Monday through Thursday, same time, same place. And as always, I take your questions, see what you're thinking, try to look at anything that might be on your mind, as well as telling you what's on mine. So let's get this thing started, and let's see what we got. So last week, as you know, was a mixed week. We had the Dow down, but everything else was pretty much flat. Let's pull in here and let's look at the S&P 500 to start with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out a little bit differently than what I normally do, and that is that I'm going to pull up the weeklies, because the weeklies are really what we try to concentrate in on the Sunday night, right? Now what we're interested in, of course, is on a larger scale, weekly's intermediate term time frame, on a larger scale, what's happening. So let's analyze most of these charts from this perspective. We'll pop over to the daily when it makes sense, or even the monthly. But we want to understand, okay, what is this market trying to do? As you know, we've been on a huge run ever since November, right? So if you just refresh your mind as to what's going on, you know, since November, this market has moved from 1340 to 1718. Folks, that's a huge move, right? That's 20%. That's nothing small. And it's pretty much been straight up. You know, you had a pretty decent pullback here in June, you know, end of May through June. Straight up run in July, right? And then started to pull back into July into August, and then September back up again. The September move, in my opinion, was mostly because of the PMIs, economics being better than expected. We ran up into the Fed meeting, pulled back. I don't think it was much on the Fed meeting as much as it was a sell the news event, and we also had the budget issues that were starting to come to light, and even the debt ceiling, which is going to hit in another week or two. So you can see this move up, and now you got a kind of a flattening situation taking place. If we look at it from a neoclassical perspective, supply and demand, you're coming back into a swing point high over here. That's 1687. Volume over there, 169, almost 170. The bottom of this bar is 1681. So 1681, 1687. So 81 to 87 is a good spot. What did we do this week, or this past week? We got the 1670. That took us underneath a retest region here and took us back into that swing point high. 170 there, 170 here. You come back into it with 158 and a half. Lighter volume. As you test lower, what does it do? A little hammer reversal, wants to go back the other way. Now that's on a weekly, right? So on the weekly, you can't construe this as negative. I mean, it's not negative the way it's trading. In other words, as we come down in price, your sellers dissipate. They go away. That's bullish. That's not bearish. And if we look at it on the daily, you can see just how much thrashing we did last week. You close here the prior week. Monday, remember, it was a big gap down. That was the day I was still getting back here. Tuesday, big spike up, and you kind of drift down. Big day down on Thursday, back up on Friday. But end result, almost the same, slightly down on the daily basis. Now the Dow Jones, I actually had a question over on Market Watch today. I addressed this over there. The Dow Jones is a little bit different. And what's different there is the Dow Jones had, remember, they did the rejiggering of what was in the Dow. And they anticipated that and ran that up in front of that actual cutover in terms of, Visa coming in, Nike coming in, and JP Morgan. JP Morgan was already in. Another financial, though. I'm trying to sit here and think, and it escapes me. But anyway, I think it was two financial. Oh, Goldman Sachs. So those three come in, right, and you get rid of the dead weight. Alcoa, a couple small, stocks that didn't have much weighting. and you put in large stocks. Now, the problem and what I addressed when I was addressing the comments and questions on Market Watch is that now you're almost 24.5, 25% of the Dow Jones. Almost a fourth of the Dow Jones is financials now. The financials have struggled the most and continue to. And so for this to sell back down really isn't a huge surprise, and so I'm totally discounting this now. I'm not really paying that much attention to it. I think it needs to settle down, and then we can probably pay a little bit more attention to it. But the reads it's given us really isn't any. It did test the top, tested on a lighter volume, tested over here in the swing point high. You're coming back down. To me, this just looks like a big range. You could get back into these lows, into these lows. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. You got decent volume there. You really have big volume over here, big wide price spread bar. So that bottom would be more interesting. 15,340. No, as a high. 14,688. That's the June 17th bar. So Dow Jones, I'm just not really that interested in. Now, if we go over to the over-the-counter issues, and in particular the NASDAQ and the NDX, these guys are nothing but bullish. I mean, volume's expanded. As you've gone higher, you're holding up there. You hadn't even came back to try to test the previous zone, right? The previous range. Now, on the daily, it doesn't look quite as bullish, but still, you got a breakout. Swing point highs never retested, so there was never a retest regen on this breakout. You spike up, you set another high, you get over it, and you come back to do a retest regen on that high, but it has a lot of volume. And it doesn't give it up, and it goes right back up. You can't construe that as negative. That's positive. And the same thing with the NDX. Looks almost identical. Same sort of thing. Big retest regen, gets underneath it, back over it. You're still in a range. And if you look at it on the weekly, you can see it's breakout city, we just hold. And now this breakout on the NDX, I believe, was the one that actually got retested already and regenerated. 30.53. 30.29, yeah. So you came back into it after the breakout, suspect breakout, proved that it wanted to go higher. You gyrated for a while and then you broke higher. If we go to the Russell, the Russell is, and I'll use the IWM because we have the volumes, doing the same sort of thing. It did come back in on a weekly with heavier volume though. That's a negative. And you can see that a little bit more clearly here on the daily. The retest regen off of this guy is the 105.63. It already came in and tested that here. Kind of came back into it on Thursday with the volume expansion, but didn't test. Right? Did get into the support zone, almost into the support zone, if not in it, and held. So when I look at OTC issues, they keep telling me the market is in really good hands. SPX looks pretty good. Dow I'm kind of dismissing because of what's going on. So index-wise, I can't get too negative with this market. Now, I realize, that's the technical picture. I realize on the fundamental side, you got a lot of issues. You got earnings coming this week. JP Morgan, Wells Fargo kick it off on Friday. You've got the budget battle that continues, partial shutdown of the government. You're not getting statistics out of the government, which is an issue over time. You've got debt ceiling that's going to come up in another 10, 12 days, which could be a huge issue if it starts affecting credit worthiness of the U.S. Debt. And you also have all of this weighing on the dollar, which is where we probably should turn our attention to next. So let me pop over and let's look at what the dollar's doing. And I'll use the UUP. We're looking at it on a daily. You can see a break under this area. It wasn't a retest, it wasn't a swing point low because we never printed one. We got a lower low, never got 6 bars, get underneath it. You're coming back into what is a resistance zone, and you can see these 3 arrows, right, which were trend reconfirmations of a bearish trend, suspect, suspect, and confirmed. Now those are dealing with swing points that are off the chart over here. As it comes back up, it's hitting resistance. But if you pull this over and look at it on a weekly, the UUP came back in to test lows. Tested it here, tested it there, both of them tested, held them, no volume on the test. This thing wants to pop around and go back up and retest into this low at 2182. So the UUP is screaming that it wants to go back the other way. And that's despite the promise or the worry of the debt ceiling. Now it may turn out that it gets up there and dies and comes right back and tests again. But in the near term, the dollar wants to go higher, and if the dollar wants to go higher, that seems to be saying that some sort of deal is going to be worked out. Now, I'm reading into it from the technical perspective, right? But that's what the technicals are telling you, and at least that's what they're telling me. Last week was a hard read on the dailies. Remember, I pulled back and started looking at the weeklies as a result of that. But the dollar itself looks like it wants to go back the other way. And if I go over and look at the bonds pulled up. Remember, they swung over a swing point high, confirmed sideways finally. They're trying to put it in the bottom, which would mean that rates are going lower. And if you're going to have someone buying the debt, that would also suggest that you're not going to have a debt limit crisis, right? Because that should hurt bonds. And so when I look at the bonds here on the daily and I look at them on the weekly, the bonds, to me, appear to be putting in some sort of a bottom. And of course, this is going to take a while to play out, but it's very different than a completely straight move down, right? Now you're getting some sort of a turn. That also suggests that that debt limit issue is somehow going to be resolved. So the bonds, the dollar, the indexes, all, for whatever reason, seem to be suggesting that things are somehow going to work out. And that's from a technical perspective. Let's go back and look at the sectors real quick. And let's see here, major sectors. So if I'm going to look at these on a weekly basis, because I don't think there's a reason to look at on a daily. So here's the IYT, does a suspect breakout, comes back immediately, do a retest regen. The bottom of that is 114.15. We didn't even get close to it. We're just coming back into support. There's nothing here. So far, looks fine on a weekly. SMHs, these guys have been the strongest ones. They broke out. They're coming back to do the retest regen. The bar they're coming into is 39.72, doing 8.3. You're doing 5.7 back into 39.37. So you get back in underneath it, you retest it, you're going to try to regenerate higher. XLB. Also a breakout. The breakout was here. 41.19 is not 41, but the 43.78 is the high. The volume is 32. The bar itself that was broken, and that's why it's red over there, it's suspect, because it broke at 34.7. Top of that's 41.61. We got as low as 41.63, almost a retest, doing 27 on the way back. Just like what we saw in the SPX, we're not seeing sellers pick up as we come back into areas where we should find buyers. The XLE, also a suspect breakout, does come back to do a retest regen. This one actually has higher volume compared to the breakout bar that was 47. It's doing 48 on the way back, so you're testing into this one as well, which is 62. Now the bottom of that is all the way down to 80.85, so this could retrace deeper, just like the IYT could, but still, it's positive. The most negative one is the XLF. This one never was able to test the highs. It's coming back to test to the lows. It's really just a range right now. That range, the bottom of that range really is this bar, 1922. So the XLF to me continues to be a problem spot for this market. The XLI, the industrials actually came back. Pretty good volume last week. The retest regen had already taken place. You didn't get another breakout here, so really it's just a range. It's almost back into the lower range. That top was 46. We traded into 45, closed at 46.27. So it's still slightly over, kind of holding that push higher, if you will. It doesn't look negative, but at the same time, if you look at the daily, it looks like it will come back and do some more testing on that volume from Thursday. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, this particular index on a daily. You had a breakout here, 46.02. You tested it once. You didn't get in to test this one, The top of that one was 45.87. You got it into 45.93. You did come back to test it here. Volume expanded, so that tells me it's going to try to test some more on a shorter term basis. So I would expect the XLI to do some more testing. So XLI, XLF still look reasonably that they can trade lower. Another breakout, XLK gets over the swing point high, has less volume. It's coming back in to do a retest regen. The bottom's 31.41. It can certainly trade back to there. The XLP, just a huge range trade on this. You can see it's coming back towards the bottom of the range. That and the XLU have been the weakest. It also looks the same way, big range trade. XLV, someone actually asked me about this Thursday, and after I thought about it after the show was over, I think I was a little bit defensive when they asked me the second time, why did I think it could go down? Honestly, I don't even remember why I said that the first time. And I think I did say that it's one of the more positive ones, and it did shoot up. So that read was correct by this, by the viewer who questioned whether or not it really should come back down. It's hard, your reflex is always to kind of defend whatever it is that you said. When I looked at it, I kind of stumbled around and said, it's okay, but because the general market's going to go down, it probably gets pressure. Well, sure enough, it did pop up there. Now it's popping up into resistance, doesn't have volume. Now it looks like, that top was 51.26, 51.26, it did it, no volume. Now it looks like it's going to consolidate, maybe come back. The last one is the XLY. And so XLV is still positive, but can probably pull back a little bit. XLY actually had a breakout over that top. Wasn't a swing point. Volumes look good. This looks positive. So if you keep in count, you've only got 2 or 3 indexes that look like they want to trade lower. XLF, XLI. XLV probably wants to trade a little bit lower or sideways off the failure on Friday. The rest of them, they can pull back farther or they can go up. There's nothing indicating either way. Now what we've seen over and over now for probably 10 days is a market that is mixed. It continues to be mixed. Even though most of the things are pointing up, there's enough mix in it to say we could drive down short term. I do think towards the end of this week you'll see this market break one way or the other because you're probably going to see, once the earnings start to pop out, either end of this week or next week, this market's going to make a move one way or the other. And if I think about that, and I think about what the general market's been doing, and I'll just pop back in the SPX right quick, the market wants to try to trade higher. Now whether it can get up and get over this and keep going will be a different story, but it certainly looks like it wants to try to trade higher. You've been consolidating over this period of time. If you get some good news, something out of Washington, whatever, you could see a pop up in this market. Until then, it's probably a mixed market. Okay, let's see here. Let me turn my attention to anything else on the OX markets. I didn't look at the rest of these. Let me pop in there real quick and see if there's anything else. I'm going to go back to the weekly. Here's the DBA. The DBA is like the TLT trying to turn and still trying to turn. It looks pretty good. It's going to take some work, but that's doing what it needs to. I didn't look at the FXE, FXY. Let's see if they failed at the highs. They actually didn't get to the swing point high on the FXE. How about FXI or Y? Yeah, just rolling over. That one actually is a failure on the short-term time frame, though. If you look on the daily, tested the top. Well, actually, that's not quite true. It didn't quite test it again, did it? That's 1083. Yeah, it didn't quite test. So that one probably will try to test again. If it fails, then you'll probably get a decent pullback. It's right at the top end of the range now. Gold and silver I didn't talk about. Let's look at gold. This is on the let's see if we can get gold to print here. Okay, so on the daily, so it tested into this area and held. Yeah, it's not bad on the daily. Let's see what the weekly looks like. So this high was 124.70. Oh, so it tested into it with lighter volume. 56 versus 109. That looks, and it tested this bar too. That looks like it's going to try to flip around. So gold looks like it wants to try to take a bump higher. Let me see what silver's doing. Same thing. In a different way, but the same thing. Fills the gap, has less volume, closes over it. Gold and silver look like they want to trade higher. All right, let me look at the foreign markets. If you have some questions, I'll take those. But let me pop over here while I have a couple minutes. Let's see what the overseas markets are doing. So let's start in Europe. The CACs. These are weeklies. So you got a breakout. You're coming back to do a retest in regen. Actually, it's already done that. So well, actually, this breakout must be from a bar over here somewhere that I can't see, which actually is on the monthly. So if I look on the monthly, you can see the bars. It's suspect, and it got over all the highs from 2011 and 2010. You wouldn't know that, unless you look at the chart. 41.69, you're trading 41, 42, 41.64, 41.43. Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting in that you got that much strength in Europe, which supposedly is struggling. And if you look at it on the daily on the CACs, you're coming back in to do your retest again into the support zone, and so far that looks clean. Looks like it's going to hold. Yeah, it's tight, but it looks like it's going to hold. Let me look at the other two. So that's the CACs. Let's look at the DAX. So on the daily, it's never even got the retest on the breakout. And on the weekly, 8557, 8546. So it comes back into it. These volumes don't look right. It looks like they're all bad from here back. Something's changed in the quote system. So I can't really compare that volume. That's not the correct volumes. I'll have to go clean this up. So there's a gap area though. Just if you just look at the breakout bar though, which is going to probably have more volume or at least as much, that breakout bar has got 6.1 and you're doing only 3.7 on the way back. So that's telling us also that this market is performing nicely and going to continue to try to work higher. FTSE's been the weakest one. Here's the weekly. So it comes in, does that test. We were looking at that last week. You can see it cleanly over here on the daily. And that test does 5.7. So it does as much volume. A little less volume than the low though. That low had 7.9 on it. So it gets under it, back over a hammer. This thing's going to try to work higher. Let's look at Asia. Start with Taipei. So a breakout. This is Chip City. Breaks out over the top on the daily, on the weekly, going for the highs, and breaks out here too. So that's a breakout on multiple time frames, multiple swing points. This thing's going for the highs. 84.39. It's already at 83.64. So another 80 points higher is nothing. Another 1%. It's going to try to get that this week. The Japanese market, the Topex, trades down. And that's probably the result of what we saw with the yen being strong. If that yen flips around, this is going to test the top of the range again. Again, we talked about this last week. This is going to eventually test that top, in my opinion. Korea, all up here at the highs. World markets, folks, are pretty much at the highs in most cases. Korea looks that way. If I look at the Hang Seng Seng's up there pushing the highs on the weeklies, on the monthlies as well. You know, they're almost at their 2011 highs. not that far away. Looks positive. All right, let me look at your questions here. So what do we got here? AON. So AON, I believe we talked about. Let's pop it up and see what we got. Okay, this is our weekly. Yeah, we did, because this was a big breakout and it was coming back. And I think what we talked about was trying to get so it's halfway into this bar now. That bar is 70 to 74. We're trading at 72. So yeah, it's halfway into the bar. Your weekly support is right back here on the breakout. I mean, so ideally you want to buy it back here. It's just the problem with these kinds of stocks is it's hard to get it. It's going to be hard to get it back here. I'd probably turn to intraday and attempt to see what that gives me. So if I pull that chart up, you know, put it on like 30 days or something and look inside this guy so we can see what we have. And let me change that to, say, a couple hours, 90 minutes maybe. So yeah, so here you can see the big bar internal is 72.27. You can see why the support's coming in right here. You see it? Your biggest volume bar is here on the way back down, though. I don't know what was driving that. It was 3 million shares or 4 million in a 2-hour period. So right here's the buy. If you wanna trade it on a weekly basis, you buy just a little bit here to get into it, right in this area, 72.15, 72.27. It got as low as 72.28. So you try to buy a little bit here, and then you just wait, and then you wait to see if you can get the better entry way down here. And that's the only way to play these things. Sometimes you simply have to buy them a little higher than you want to. But at the same time, you don't go overboard. You just buy some, right? Just a small, you know, say you're going to allocate $10,000 to it. Well, maybe you buy 1,500 of it up there at the 72 area. Tommy says it looks like resistance on SPX is right above 1,700 on a daily, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sure it is actually. There's the market's still mixed, but all I was trying to point out is that there's a lot more positives than there are negatives. So if I pull this up and pull it back over and look at it on the daily, you remember this was the bar we were testing into, the 1679 bar. We tested into it 2 or 3 times. It held. There was less volume each time we tested in. 32.7, we're coming into 34. So a little less volume each time. All right. Now as you come back up, you do have resistance from about 1691 to 97. Right? It's got to get over that. And actually the 2 bars that are most interesting are the ones with volume, in particular this one, which is 1700, which is what you're talking about. So on the way back up, that's a wide price spread, fairly high volume bar. That is going to be a tough cookie to crack. If you get into it, that will tell us something, right? If you can get into that and stay into it, that will definitely tell us something. But from 1700 to 1709 is going to be a very tough area to get over, in my opinion. That will be the difficult part. If it gets over it, this market's going right back to the highs. If it stalls there, right, then you're going to continue to trade in this range. Matter of fact, I think that the first part of this week you're going to continue to range trade. There's too many mixed signals, even with the positives that I pointed out. Remember, I was pointing out weekly positives on most of these things, because tonight's show is a longer term, intermediate term time frame. And I think the weeklies continue to suggest that this market's going to try to trade higher. So that was really what I was trying to say. All right. Hey folks, it's getting a little late here. I'm going to call it a night. I will talk to you tomorrow. Until then, have a great one. Tell a friend, tell 2. I'm L.A. Little. This is and was your daily TA wrap. Actually, your weekly. I'll get that straight before it's over. Have yourself a great night. And until next time, take care. Good night, folks.